And we're back for an overdue Chinese Grand Prix recap. Great race, as usual. Not as good as the season opener, in my opinion. But still, for 2025, not 2021. It might be 2021. We'll talk about that later. 2025 F1 season has started off with a bang. And the good times just keep rolling. What'd you think of the race, Sean?
I thought it was good. I will take back my criticism from last year. China, at least with these cars in this generation, is proving to be entertaining.
Yeah, it wasn't like edge of your seat.
No.
Epic, but it was still like there was a lot going
race.
on. Yeah, it was a good race, exactly. And the offsetting strategy, I think, definitely kicked it up a notch. Otherwise, it was kind of looking like 2024 in the sense that there was just 2x2, not even 2x2, but like it was just a straightforward type of race. Like the fast were fast, the slow were slow until the offsetting strategy, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna keep up our theme of this year, and we're gonna do the good and the bad for this episode. And Sean and I like good news first, so we'll start with the good. This week, I don't know
your bad news first, but
you prefer bad news first.
I prefer bad news first personally, but you call the shots. So,
well, I think our listeners like the good news first. So,
all right,
we'll give them the good news. We'll give you the stuff you may or may not want to hear. And ironically, in this generation, or I guess YouTube generation, technically the bad news is what everybody wants to see. So we could start, or we could, make them wait, get them excited for the bad news. That's my thought process. There's a million ways to look at this. All right, you want to start with your good news, because it's a surprise today. So give me one or two good news to start.
You're not going to like this one, but Haas showed that there is something in that car. They show that they can still compete. So I'm putting that up there on the good side. Obviously not, their position is, what you would call manipulated because of the disqualifications. I still think it's completely fair that they're where they are because they didn't get disqualified. So, double points finish. Esteban in 5th, I believe.
Yeah, well, after the disqualifications, yes.
Sure. But that was a good finish for him. And Behrman got 4 points, which puts him in 7th.
He ended up 8th. On the track, he was 10th.
Okay. Yeah.
14-point haul, though, for Haas. I agree with you. They were also in my good news this week.
Yeah. I have them in the good news section mainly because Haas admitted they were surprised by Australia. They went away, they did some work, and they came back with a package that was promising. And it worked. They had pace. They weren't completely abysmal. And they didn't just kind of sit around on their hands and hope that the Bahrain pace came back. So I think that's a good sign for this year for them. At least at this point, they're able to get up there. They're able to show that they're not completely useless.
I have them at 6th this year, so I'm completely agreeing with everything you're saying. I have hopes for them. I didn't think they would come out in Australia as bad as they did. I was surprised, to be completely honest.
I mean, and at 14 points at the moment, they're up there.
This season's wild. I think your prediction of a lot of converging points, like a lot of teams with a lot of points, might be in play. I know, like we said, it's early, but it seems like every weekend a smaller and smaller team is scoring big points, which is amazing. The only thing I challenge is that Esteban had pace all weekend. He was constantly fighting for points in the sprint. He was up there in qualifying, up there in sprint qualifying, and the entire race he was in the top 10. The only thing I would challenge is Behrman had no pace until the offsetting strategy. And we got to give more kudos to Haas than him. That would just be my take on that. I know I'm a little bit biased, I have no problem with him finishing 8th after disqualification. It seems to be his luck. That seems to be everything he gets in the sport. He only gets points if it's a unique situation. It's not fair to him, I'll admit, but I'm just calling what I see.
Sure. But I'll go to what I usually go to in these cases. He stayed on the track. He kept himself in a position where after things shook out, he was where he was. The team didn't do anything that would have gotten his car disqualified. He didn't crash into anything. He wasn't completely useless and so far out of the points that even after a handful of cars got disqualified, he was still nowhere, like somebody else will get to.
No, listen, the bar is so low with these rookies right now, as we're probably going to talk about, that you're right. Keeping it on the track is a positive. But I would just say this idea that he's lightning quick, he's a generational talent. That still remains to be seen. But I think Haas...
absolutely not. He's not a generational talent.
Well, this is what we're trying to be fed about him, that he's just that good. And it's just like, no, this is just another situation of circumstance. But I want to give it to him. I want to eat it a little bit for me calling him the next Nikita Mazepin. I think that's safe to say he's not that after this weekend, but yeah.
There is somebody on the grid who is.
Oh, we're just chomping at the bit to talk about that guy. I know. Save it for the bad news. I know, me too. Yeah. Haas is back in play, and that's good. And this is very good. This midfield battle is heating up. Albon got another 6 points, and Sainz broke his duck in Oliver Bierman fashion. And yeah, more about that later. So they should be very, very, very happy with that weekend. And I hope for the sake of the midfield, like I'm saying, I hope this is not just a one weekend type of thing, but we shall see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they have the pace in Japan.
Japan's a real racer's course, so we can just count out Esteban. But maybe they'll squeak a 10th and 9th or something like that.
Yeah, Japan is a track that favors smooth drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Yuki has gone well there. Same with China. Yuki, for whatever reason, seems to be very good at China. He's had some shit luck the last 2 years, but his performance up to that luck in China is very good, and you can see it if you watch the onboards. He's very smooth around there.
He wasn't in my... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that's off topic, so we're finishing up Haas here, right?
Yeah, I have nothing much else to say about Haas if you want to shift into Yuki. He's not on my list, but in terms of pure pace, 6th in the sprint, amazing again. Yep. He's there. He's there every time. And like you said, well, as we'll probably talk later, the team's letting him down. But yeah, was he part of your good news at all, or?
I'll come to him next. Just maybe a fun fact. I was at a meeting today at the college I graduated from. I'm part of the industry PAC committee for the college in their co-op program. And I found out, I knew this for a long time, that even when I was there, that Haas, the college is a technical center and distribution hub for Haas CNC.
Oh, wow.
And they still are. And they're one of the major funders of kind of the apprenticeship program at that college. So I've got a little bit of a connection to Haas there, and now I feel like I owe them something from an F1 standpoint.
Maybe you could just buy some of their merch and say, hey, thank you.
It's not particularly nice merch, though, is it?
It's very not, no. Black, white, and a little bit of red, and
yeah.
They need a rebranding. Maybe when Toyota comes in, they'll get a rebranding. Stay tuned.
I will say the Gazoo Racing colors are extremely close to what the car looks like now.
Okay, then they're just screwed then. By the way, I graduated from that same college too, just for the record.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Yeah. Very different. Yeah, very different. We don't speak of that. Anyways, so next on your list was Yuki?
We can make it Yuki, yep.
Sure.
So, good. This is a tale. The theme of today's bad and good is going to be a tale of twos. So, there's Yuki in the good and Yuki in the bad.
Mm.
And then there's going to be Ferrari in both. So, Yuki, the good, is the sprint race went his way. He scored decent points for a sprint race, showed that he had the pace to get up there in qualifying and hold it. You know, he wasn't blisteringly fast in the race pace, but he also wasn't losing time. Like last year, he had a couple of good qualifying performances, but in the race, he dropped back, 14 to 20 seconds and eventually start sliding through the field a bit. That's not what we saw. He did drop back a little bit. There's a bit of a gap between them, but he was able to fight and he was able to, get past some cars, and it was a good performance all around. So a continuation of form from Australia. And Hadjar didn't do much, but he also wasn't terrible. So all in all, I would say the weekend was, at least the sprint portion of the weekend was good for Yuki and RB.
Yeah, him and Hadjar were running top 10 of the race for, I'd say, a good half of it. Probably just under.
Mm-hmm.
So the pace is there. We already said that. If they can figure out their strategy, a big points haul is coming. It seems like it's coming, but this is... I'll talk about it more on the bad. It's your guess is as good as mine when that happens. So.
Yeah, and that's just it. The car is there pace-wise. It's consistent, and it seems to be, let's say, more user-friendly than some of the other ones. Right? Hadjar, it doesn't seem to be struggling with it. He's put in some decent performance, which is not what could be said about his performances in FP1 last year. So either he's gotten a lot better or the car is more predictable this year. I'm going to go ahead and say it's the latter.
I think everybody, based on what we've seen this week, is going to say that too. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it for them?
I think so. Give me some of your goods.
Albon.
That came out really wrong.
No, it didn't. We're joking, everybody. Okay. Albon, to me, is a good. It's whatever happened in the offseason is lighting a fire up on his ass. And I thought what we're seeing out of him would be what we saw out of Sainz. It seems like all he just needed was more time in that Williams, more time to figure it out. It was very temperamental the last couple of years. It's getting on the right path this year, but he is steadily scoring points, 16 points already, always in the conversation, even in the sprint and qualifying. I think he's in Q3 in every one of them. Maybe not the sprint qualifying, but yeah. And he's what I thought Sainz would be. And he's just steady, in control. You saw in the race, he's like, no, let's stick to our original plan. I'm very good with the tires. I know what I'm doing. He's starting to take charge. And I really like that. I think it's overdue, especially after last year. I think last year was just a series of unfortunate events, originally exacerbated by Sargent, and then made worse by him and Franco. But I think they've learned all the mistakes from last year, and they're on for a fifth or maybe even a surprise fourth because of the team we'll talk about later screwing it all up. So
yeah, and I would tend to agree with that. Williams and Albon in general have been on a good trajectory. We do have to remember that last year that car was the first attempt at a more balanced car, right? Previous years they had gone for a very low drag kind of slippery car, which let them compete in places like Monza, but nowhere else. So I think this year is an evolution of that. They're using the same basic chassis, but changed a few things to make, to learn on what they had gathered last year. So it makes sense that it's a more comfortable experience for Albon, with the improvements over last year and the extra year of experience in it. So yeah, hopefully it continues down that way, and we'll see if Sainz can keep up.
He's probably going to, but I don't know. It's a bad start. So he's now got to prove himself. I'll just sum it up. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I'll just say here that I think I've heard some talk. I don't know if it's true. I don't know much about this. I didn't look into it any further, but I did hear some rumbling that there's a chance Sainz is actually in last year's car.
Oh, shit.
Where perhaps Williams still isn't where they need to be manufacturing and budget-wise, and they're using last year's chassis adapted to fit some of the aerodynamic components, which sounds a whole lot of what I just said. Sounds a whole lot like what I just said about why the car might be better. But where Albon is using this year's chassis, which is based on last year's with some small tweaks, it seems like maybe Sainz is in a bit of a Frankenstein car.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't seen any proof of that, but there were some rumblings around F1 media about that being a possibility.
Well, it just means that he'll probably get some good upgrades then. So he's just got to bide his time for now. Yeah, and figure this out. Yeah.
Exactly. So by the 5 to 8 race range, they may be able to bring two of the exact same car, and maybe we see Sainz jump up there, kind of like what we saw with McLaren a couple of years ago.
I'll just sum up Williams with this. It sounds like last year was a 2-step back type of thing to take a great leap forward, and they cleared all the old brush by taking a step back, and then now they're going to make a leap. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah, and I really can't stress enough how much of an impact two good drivers would have.
Mm-hmm.
You now have two drivers that are capable of providing good feedback to a team that is already on an upward trajectory. That was probably one of the best decisions they made. Stop fucking around with drivers that are just on the cusp of being good enough. Get two good drivers, pay them properly, and develop the car the way it should be. And we're seeing what looks to be a potential resurgence for Williams.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Yeah, it sounds like they just needed that infusion of money to stay alive, and now the path is clear. But you're right. At some point, they had to get rid of that dead wood, so to speak. The Sargents, the Latifis. Had to happen.
Yes.
Had to happen eventually. The George Russell. Anyway, we're sort of kidding. Do you have another good for me?
You give me one more, and I'll keep working.
Okay, my last good is Piastri, obviously. I was so impressed with him this weekend. As we'll talk about later, probably am going to abandon who I think is really going to win the title for him, for Oscar Piastri, because, wow, he just took over the race in a way that I didn't think he had it in him. And it just, it was exemplified at one point when Lando's complaining about his dirty air, and they said, Oscar, speed up. And he's like, sure. And next thing you know, he's 2 seconds faster than 2 seconds ahead where he was. No issues off pole like Lando, no learning curve. It's just there. It's just there. And I hope, because I know I can eat these words, I hope he keeps this consistency up, because we saw last year he could fall off at any point in time. And I want to blame that on growing pains and rookie shit. But if he stays like this, that's a champion right there. And like we talked about last week, he probably should have 2 wins. Realistically, he should be 25 points ahead of where he is now, which is way ahead of Max Verstappen, way ahead of Lando Norris. So,
he should be 23 points ahead of where he is. because he got 2 points in Australia.
That's okay. That's right. But so that still puts him at 57. And
yeah, no, he'd be leading.
And -7 for Lando, who is 44.
Right.
So, yeah, he'd be up by like 15 points already. And I think it would be pretty obvious that he has arrived, but I think because of McLaren, which I'll talk about later, that's now an issue. But yeah, great job, Oscar.
Yeah, I agree. I'll roll my Oscar good into yours then. So yes, I think that was a good performance from them. For whatever reason, neither of them had pace in the sprint race, but we saw that they came back, they qualified well, and they took it. And like you said, Piastri he got out front there, and there was never any real question. There was not a huge amount of pressure on him. I don't think at any point he was stressed.
No.
And this goes to, I've been a Piastri fan since he came in, basically. And you've given me shit about it, but I stand by my position. He seems like he's got a good, stable head on him, and he doesn't get worked up. He doesn't get flustered, and that makes him consistent. He's got the car to give him wins, and he's going to take them. And I heard someone say this in another podcast that, and I agree with it. It just didn't strike me until I heard them talk about it. When you look at Lando, when he's on pole, like in a post-qualifying interview where Lando scores pole, he looks nervous. In the pre-race interviews, he looks nervous. He knows that his record on pole is not great, and it's still in his head. All right, and I think you said it before, Norris has got to change the way he thinks. He has to think like a winner. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think he gets in his head and he makes it worse for himself. And potentially that puts the pressure on him. Why he never converted those poles to wins until mid last year. And that's where I think Piastri is different. Piastri just gets out there and does it. And the fact that he's so level-headed and calm all the time in any situation we see allows him to focus on the job at hand and get it done. Like I don't think I've ever heard him irate over the radio. I don't think I've ever heard him say anything, that would remotely be considered emotional in a shitty situation. Even what happened in Australia, we didn't see any of it. And that just helps when he's on pole. His head is the same. His mindset is unaltered. The lights go out and he goes. No worry about anybody behind him. We saw he chopped over to block off Russell going into turn one, but it wasn't a mad dash, dive bomb like we've seen from Verstappen sometimes. It was a well-judged defensive move, and everybody got around turn one perfectly fine, and he was in front. That to me is a racing driver who is talented and mature and knows exactly what he has to do.
Well said.
Given the car that he's in, it would not surprise me if he took this off of Norris.
It's whether the team lets him, right? And my reservations about him were Mark Webber. Will Mark Webber get in his head, turn him into a team player over a winner? And that was my reservations at first. I think I might be wrong about that, and we'll see. We'll see as the season goes on. The only thing I talked about him was the little things, or even Norris too. It's really just the little things that make a champion. And you said it perfectly. I think you think he has it. I think he now has it too. It's because in 2023 he wasn't at the beginning that much better than say Nick DeVries, but he was just good enough. And I think they've nurtured him properly so that he's really become the person he is. So I will lead it in that sense. But I've always seen talent in him. I just wondered, based off of my skepticism of Formula One media, if he ever was that good, and I think he is. So I'll eat that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you like seeing me squirm.
I do.
All right, so that's it for my good, unless you want to add anything else about Piastri.
Nope, I'll close it there.
Okay. So you have another good for us?
I do. Hamilton, specifically in the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that came from. I wasn't expecting it, but he got out there and he pulled, I'll refer to it as a Verstappen-esque performance. Die-hard Lewis fans will probably hate me for that because they would say it's a Lewis performance. But we haven't seen it in years.
Mm.
And he got out there and he got on top of it and he put it on pole and there was basically no pressure. And similar to Piastri in the Grand Prix, once Hamilton was out there in the race, nobody could touch him. So where did that come from? As far as I know, as far as I can tell, they didn't make any massive changes to the car for the weekend. They just got out there and they did it, and he was more comfortable. I'm sure there were some setup changes and, some logistics and team reorganization that went on in the background. But that's the Lewis I think we were all hoping to see at Ferrari. So I'm glad to see that there's a potential for it to come out this year.
Well, I'll agree. And I don't think he'd want his first win at Ferrari to be a sprint win, but I guess he's going to have to take it when he can right now, as we'll talk about later.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a good performance. I thought for a bit Verstappen was playing cat and mouse with him, and it seemed like midway through, before his tires died, he might have caught him. But then for him, like you said, for Hamilton to win by 8 seconds is not an accident. That's a great performance. So in 8 seconds over Piastri, who was held off by Verstappen for a couple laps. So, yeah. It's good. It was a sign of positivity. I'll save the I'll just say it now. I've noticed the last 4 sprints or so, the best teams are treating the sprint like a practice more and more. We've seen, I think, 4 different winners. I think maybe like Ferrari really wanted to win it, not realizing it might damage their race potential, because they didn't seem to learn anything from that sprint. But
we'll get to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're both on the same page there. Yeah. Yeah. You want to say anything else?
Yeah. And I think that's what the sprint has become, unfortunately. It's become a way to make practice more interesting for people, right? Because I don't mind sitting there and watching 3 hours of practice. It's not particularly exciting, but you learn a lot of the background, right? But obviously they want to get as many people watching as much F1 as possible. So that's why they've changed it to now have 2 qualifying sessions on sprint weekends, one for the sprint, one for the Grand Prix, and then in between, the cars come out of Parc Fermé, which, if you recall, the first couple years they had sprints, you qualified after practice 1, and then that was it. You had to race the sprint and the GP with the same settings for both.
Yeah.
And the teams didn't like that. Obviously, they bitched and moaned about it. I thought there was merit in it. But now we have this format, and I'm not upset with it. And it does end up being a longer practice session. But I think there's value in doing that, because if anything, it tells you before going into the Grand Prix, hey, we don't have the pace we thought we did. These tires, this tire choice isn't the one to start on.
Yes.
Right? It helps develop the strategy for the race a little more, which I think is an interesting point about how we saw, like, despite the fact that we had a sprint, the strategy for the Grand Prix was still different.
Yes.
It didn't line up. So I think it's worthwhile to have this format as well, even if it is an extended practice and we do see some of the teams not treating it as seriously as others. That's just more weight towards, hey, there's value in it, because teams like Haas and Alpine can then go and sneak a high a high race win position off of it, score some decent points, while teams like Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes are, trying different things to see if the setup's there.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I was going to add that too. Everybody learned that the medium was not the race tire, and that was a big deal. Everybody learned their strategy after the sprint race, and it has made it more exciting. Yeah, it has made everything in Formula One more exciting, in my opinion. Yeah, but yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, and you say they learned that the medium was not the race tire, but nobody had bothered to run the hard tire either. Not a single team ran the hard tire before the Grand Prix. So nobody knew what that tire could do.
Not even in practice one, eh? That's very
Nobody.
Very
Nothing.
silly. Very, very silly.
Well, they only had 2 sets.
Ah.
So they were concerned it was going to be a 2-stop race. And you don't want to end up, the less likely strategy would have been a 2-stop race with 2 sets of mediums. You needed one of those mediums before the Grand Prix, so that wasn't going to happen. They were all worried that they would need both sets of hards to last the entire race.
Yeah.
So nobody wanted to scrub one in.
Yeah, it's still I learned a lot from watching that sprint is all I'm going to say. So, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
I wonder if a solution for the sprint that would make everybody happy would be like a winner take all, 5 points to the winner, and that's it. Make teams go for it, you know? No? Oh, okay.
Then there's no benefit to even run them.
I guess that's
right? Because
true.
if you have to win and nobody else gets points, teams like Haas and Alpine are just going to throw it in. They're going to do whatever. They'll go out and they'll putter around and not try, or they'll sit in the garage. There's going to be no incentive to go out there and risk damage to the car at that point.
Yes, but then if you have, like, say, Williams back in the fold in the future, and 5 teams are fighting for the win in any given weekend, then that winner take all seems really interesting. But it's based off a lot of assumptions. Yeah,
but again, like, if it's 5 points and if you don't have competitive nature and not all the teams are going to want to compete, then it's not worth doing, frankly.
Fair point. All right, I just have one meh to add before we move on to the bad. And I'm putting McLaren in the meh simply because I think they're looking like champions every week, more and more every week. And to me, they are guilty until proven innocent this year. If you want to convince me you're worthy of the constructors and the drivers, I'll believe it when I see it. They didn't make any big mistakes this weekend, but I think Lando's brakes going out is pretty scary in the second race, and something that is going to hopefully wake them up a little bit. Like, if you think the job is done, something like that can happen at any point still. You're still kind of that team that could fuck it up. So I'm not going to put them in the good just yet. To me, they're just meh. Whereas Oscar was amazing. So just a small little blurb about that.
Yeah, and I'll pick that up and run with it a bit. I think they've built a really good car. I think come Spain that might change. Right? They put in new regulations as kind of an emergency stopgap for the mini DRS that McLaren clearly was the protagonist of. So they changed, the maximum allowable gap between the 2 planes of the wing, and they've tightened up the regulation or the testing to see how flexible these elements are. And clearly that is something McLaren got on top of and everybody else is trying to capitalize on before the regulation changes permanently in Spain. The fact that they had to put an emergency amendment to the regulation for the second race in tells me that McLaren's probably got something else going on with that wing. So we'll see once everybody is forced into the change in Spain if the dynamic changes.
Okay.
I think potentially it does. I still think the car is fast, and I still think potentially it's the fastest car on the grid. But McLaren as a team might butcher this for themselves again. You know, they snuck in the constructors last year because Red Bull was running with one car. Ferrari almost caught them. If they make those mistakes again, they will not take the championship.
Well said. Is there outside of the wing, is there anything else that they have to worry about on their car? Like, you think it's balanced, they just found an advantage there?
Red Bull keeps throwing shit out to see if it sticks about, they're doing something that makes their cars manage tires better.
The cooling.
Yeah, they designed a better car. That's all it is. They've designed a more aerodynamically efficient car. I don't think there's anything more to it than that.
Well,
right? Like, sorry, just on that note, the trend in F1 for years and years and years was you try and heat the tires through your braking, right? Your brakes are the hottest component on that car, and they're built inside the tires. And yes, you have brake cooling and all this other nonsense to stop them from igniting. But a lot of teams design this package to be able to radiate heat from the brakes into the tires to keep them warm. It's a pretty common thing. And we've seen different adaptations of things like wheel rim design to help modulate how much heat is rejected and how much heat is kept in the wheel assembly. And that's actually why we have common rims now. Every team uses the same rim. Previously, they were able to produce their own rims. The FIA will say, oh, it's about cost savings and everything else. Well, yes, it's also partly about the design of the car being consistent. They don't want people taking advantage of airflow through the brake ducts that then goes out the wheel and creates all sorts of fun vortices for the car behind. That being said, it's a common design for the rim, and therefore the brake package all needs to fit in the same space. If you have a very efficient set of brake cooling ducts and you understand how those brake cooling ducts work from a thermal standpoint, how much air is flowing through them, where they go, how correlated your CFD models are back from wind tunnel through the software that does the CFD calculations, you can get a really good picture on how much thermal load you're putting through the tire. And if you understand how much thermal load you're putting from the inside of the tire and how much downforce you have, you can pretty accurately model what your tire temperatures are going to be. So, to me, it doesn't sound like they're doing anything suspect, let's say. It sounds like they've got a good handle on the design of that car, and they've got a really good team of engineers working on the areas of the car that give them the benefit, like tire management. If your drivers don't have to do the tire management, if the car helps them do that, it's going to be a better car to drive. And I think that's where that comes from. And I think Horner is just throwing shit out there because he's trying to pick fights with all the team principals these days. And don't get me wrong, I don't like Zach Brown, but he's also not the team principal anymore.
Well, Horner does this every time he's in the midst of a fight. He tries to get in their head, and I just don't think anybody's falling for it anymore, as we'll talk about in a bit.
I don't even think he's trying to... Yeah, but I don't think he's trying to get into their head. I think he's just trying to throw as much shit at the FIA to see what sticks. If I throw enough out there, eventually they're going to investigate something and they might find a gremlin somewhere.
Yeah, I think he also has a firm hand around the balls of the FIA as well. So, yeah, it's just to your point. Like, I don't know, maybe he doesn't have to...
That's not a good analogy to use with Horner.
Nobody said his balls. All right. Like he said, though, I think that's what you were alluding to with the whole talk about Spain. We'll see how McLaren finishes this year. So
yes,
it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Corner did say that after China. If that's what he needs to tell himself to get himself to sleep at night, that's fine with me. Yeah. Is that it for good for you?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.